Good Friday morning and welcome to the latest edition of Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge, broadcasting on riversedgepgh.com/live. We're also on Facebook Live, and we're on the live stream this Friday morning. And I say we because for the second time ever in studio, my brother, sports medicine professional Mark Gajtka, joins me, and you can see him there on the split screen. Very sexy. Mark, good morning. Welcome back to Pittsburgh. Of course, you live in Northern California these days, about to take a safari to Africa, but we're your little pit stop for the beginning of the holiday season.
Pun intended. Pit stop.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. Wow.
Wow.
I'm wittier than I think on short rest, so to speak.
Skull, Jerry.
It is indeed. So, well, we look forward to about an hour of quality sports talk, the sports talk extravaganza that is Gike's Got Game. And again, thank you for watching and listening. Thank you for indulging us in the first edition of Pens Overtime, weekly Pens postgame show. I was on the air for about a half an hour after Wednesday's OT victory over the Bruins. Bob Grove, Pens historian, joined me for about 10 of those minutes. It was very enjoyable. We're planning on doing it again this upcoming Tuesday as the New York Rangers come to town. So something to look forward to there. But coming up later on this hour, this morning, this weekly edition of Gike's Got Game, we'll be discussing some trendy topics in sports medicine, including, of course, the idea of rest and how important it is to high-level athletes. Also, Sidney Crosby's biomechanical advantage. We will not be banning the cliche. We'll be talking about a different type of ban. Should high school football be banned? That's a hot topic these days, too. And we'll wrap up the show with the final number relating to the Steelers, who are going into their final 3 games of the season with a real shot at the AFC North title. But first, something that's been making a lot of news in recent times, recent days, as the NBA works its way toward the middle of the season. We don't talk basketball that often on this program, Mark, but a big trending topic has been, or was, the Cavs' decision to leave their so-called Big Three at home for a trip to Memphis. LeBron James, Kevin Love, Kyrie Irving all didn't even make the trip to Memphis to play the Grizzlies, as the Cavs are focusing on rest and trying to get their big guys a breather. And the San Antonio Spurs have done this in the past, especially when Tim Duncan and Tony Parker were on the team, guys in their mid to late 30s. And this seems, though, to be a hot topic in sports, especially at the highest level. The most recent MLB collective bargaining agreement mandates 6 extra days off in the following 5 seasons. So we're seeing a lot of talk about this, and do you have any idea why exactly all of a sudden rest seems to be the subject du jour?
No, it's kind of funny that it's all of a sudden seems like it's coming more into the spotlight, compared, because this isn't a new thing, with resting and, the importance of rest. But I think maybe within sports, the fact that you have, obviously the money portion goes into it, and the product, it's not just a job, it is a product for consumers. And I think that plays into it, that there was that expectation that maybe the athletes should play all the time, every game. And I'm sure they want to, and I don't think they understood either that their bodies really can't take this much of a demand over and over, especially because if you think about the game really is more of their rest really than some of the practices and their training sessions, I'm assuming
would be. That's a good point.
So really that portion is actually not nearly as demanding as probably a lot of their day in, day out type agenda is, throughout the week. So yeah, I think it's kind of cool, though, that we're starting to see that. And I think the more that the bigger stars, especially with Cleveland doing this, and then the bigger sports starting to do this, I think it's actually a really neat thing. And we might be able to see it within other sports, too, and within other teams. And I don't see why you couldn't, especially in a sport like hockey, if you transition that, because you have such an overlap with the minor league system, too, to be bringing in all these guys that could easily just flow in, take the space for somebody later in the year to keep somebody healthy for a good playoff push. I think that's why not utilize that? I think that's really important, because these guys, most of the time, they're playing through injuries that nobody knows about. They're not on reports, and
Yeah, they sure are.
yeah.
Not a lot is revealed in the world of hockey, and that's
With any
funny
sport for that matter.
Right. Well, it's funny you bring that up because I had a discussion on Twitter about this very topic when this news came out that the Cavs were not going to send their top players on to Memphis, and I think hockey might be the last sport to embrace this type of thing. We see it more in baseball, but baseball's different. It's expected that your top players are going to get 1 or 2 days off a week, even if they are performing well. And even if
grueling
they're feeling
schedule.
pretty good.
Yeah.
Right. So they tend to get more days down, if you will, but not so much in hockey. That is not part of the culture, the tough man culture that surrounds the sport. And so I think for that reason, primarily, we'll see that come to hockey last. But I think basketball doesn't get enough credit for being a strenuous sport and a taxing sport, on the legs especially. They're running on hardwood, and you always see NBA players with ice bags on their knees after each and every game. And something that maybe hardcore, that only hardcore basketball fans know, is that the NBA schedule is possibly the worst in terms of rest in the major 4 leagues, because they play sometimes 4 times in 5 nights. Hockey doesn't do that. I mentioned baseball, but it's not quite the same level of pounding on the joints and strenuous in terms of cardiovascular. But basketball might be the one sport where you absolutely need to leave some guys at home.
Yeah, I mean, I challenge anybody to go out and play a game of pickup, right now and see how you feel. That's just such even if I haven't played in a long time, I'll leave being pretty sore. I mean, it's such a highly anaerobic or plyometric type activity. It's a lot of pounding, a lot of jumping. The landing, it's a lot of force on the body, and that's with every play. I mean, how often is somebody not jumping in basketball every single play? Yeah, that's a good point to bring up. It is a grueling sport to some degree, even though it's not necessarily what we consider a fully contact sport, but it is a collision sport because people are going to be banging into each other. But it's pretty intense, and I don't know. I think it was just really interesting with the rest that they are, resting all their stars at one time versus trying to
staggered
up.
Right? Yeah.
And I don't know if that's maybe because they want those guys to continue a chemistry together. That's has to be part of it. That if they play, Kevin Love on one night with the other guys or the other portions of the team, and they keep out Kyrie Irving and LeBron James, how is that going to mess with their chemistry on the court and so on and so forth? But I think when you're at that high of a level, those guys are still going to get repetitions in practice. And I brought that up earlier. You don't realize how many reps and how much these guys are putting their bodies through in practice, and it's just practice, man.
In a lot of cases, they don't necessarily need the extra pounding unless maybe you're a guy who's coming off the bench and you need to stay sharp. You're listening to Gike's Got Game. You're watching Gike's Got Game on Facebook Live on the River's Edge, and I'm Matt Gajtka. My brother Mark is in the studio again. He was with us back in August. I think you made your way through town, and you stopped by. We talked a great deal about concussions that day, which is another hot button issue in sports medicine, continues to be as we learn more and more about brain injuries and their effects on the human body for years and decades after they are experienced. So that's kind of a darker subject. I think we're going to maybe stick to a little bit of lighter fare today, but I did enjoy that discussion. The rest thing continues to be an issue, and you hear about this in football, and you may think, well, they only play once a week, but guys don't like coming back on 3 days rest to play those Thursday night games, and even Thursday afternoon games on Thanksgiving. I think it was Washington that had to play Sunday night, and then they played the 12:30 kickoff on Thanksgiving Day. So that's really 3.5 days. That's not even, 2.5 days. That's not even really a full 3.
Yeah, I know the Seahawks' Richard Sherman has been pretty vocal about how the NFL has been trashing them and has shown no respect about this whole playing on Thursday, and they need to get rid of the Thursday game. And I agree. I don't know. I've never liked that they moved the game to Thursday. It never made sense. They started it out. I think it used to just be on like NFL Network, and I don't know if it still is or if
it's simulcast on CBS now and NBC, depending on who has the package that week.
Right.
I think among football fans, there's not a consensus, but a building belief that the football on Thursday night is not very high quality either, so it's not even worth tuning in for. So if you're the NFL and your ratings are down this year, especially for these Thursday games, there is a feeling of oversaturation with football. So for once, the business interests of the NFL may line up with the players' health interests. So that would be certainly a rare occasion indeed, because for a while there was talk about an 18-game regular season, perhaps expanding the playoffs. That could push the average team up toward 20 regular season games, plus the 4 or possibly 5 preseason games that are played. Those aren't as strenuous. The stars don't play a lot in those, but still it is an opportunity to get injured. And the Players Union in the NFL has been, I think, left behind its brethren in other sports. It seems like that the players in the NFL don't get as many rights. Their contracts aren't even guaranteed, unlike in the other 3 major pro sports. So this could be a spot for a pushback for the next CBA negotiation, is the player safety, the rest issue, and that is rising to the forefront in terms of things that the athletes I know are certainly aware of. You're listening to Gike's Got Game, and we will be back after this short break. Segment 1 is in the books. When we come back, we're talking biomechanics. Mark is a certified strength and conditioning specialist, and I think he might have some interesting insights on Sidney Crosby and what makes him so difficult to bump off the puck. Why is he able to maintain his explosiveness now getting toward age 30? A lot of it involves his diligence on making sure that his technique is on the up and up. So we'll get into that a little bit more when we return. Stay with us right here on Gike's Got Game. Glad to have you with us. Welcome into, usually I say Mr. Gajtka's neighborhood, but we've got a couple of Gajtkas for you. Lucky you. Matt and Mark returning in just a hot second.
Hi, I'm Mike Storr, host of the Awesome Cast, which you can hear right here on River's Edge Radio. We're talking tech, getting geeky every week with people from Pittsburgh in the industry. Go check us out, awesomecast.net, or listen to us right here on River's Edge Radio, Thursday mornings, 8 a.m. after Funny Money.
Welcome back inside the Millvale Studios. This is Gike's Got Game, period 2 on the way. Matt Gajtka with Mark Gajtka, and we are both glad to be with you on this frigid Friday morning, probably the coldest morning that we've had in Pittsburgh in at least a couple of years. You and I were reminiscing. I used to live in Michigan. You used to live in Wisconsin for that really cold winter 3 years ago. And you were saying, right, it never got 13, 14. It never got above, you said 0 in Wisconsin for a stretch?
About 30 days, I think. It was like in January. We didn't see above 0 degrees. I mean, at like 2 in the afternoon, it was still negative digits. Like, how's this even possible?
That's when it gets real. And you weren't even that far north, all things considered.
No, it was weird. I think because it was like how it was situated. We were kind of in the middle of the state, so the wind just kind of crushing through, across the plains and stuff. Because it's pretty, it's flat.
You're exposed out there.
Oh, yeah. And so, it has time to the tundra.
Right. Well, where I was in Grand Rapids, a little bit protected by the lake. It doesn't get as windy, and but what we did get was snow, and there was snow nearly every day. It felt like we were below freezing for 40 consecutive days there late in that winter. So it was incredible when the weather finally broke. I don't know what we're in for this week, or this winter, and this week in particular, because I think tomorrow it's supposed to be in the 50s.
Yeah, it's going to rain.
We might play some golf tomorrow. That'd be fun. Get out there and get that round in. I have a streak of consecutive months with at least one golf round in it on the line, so I have to get out here in December. I haven't done it yet, and it's the 16th. So I'm starting to feel the pressure, especially when the weather gets decent, even above freezing. I'm thinking about going out. That's just the sickness that I have. We were talking about rest and recuperating. Anything you want to add? I abruptly went to a song there after our first segment, but have you read any studies before we move on? Have you read any studies, anything at all that you've seen recently that indicates that a certain type of rest is advantageous, that rest might be more important, less important than we thought before?
Yeah. Type of rest is kind of an important thing, because it's not just, when you think of rest, what do you imagine, like somebody crashing on a couch, or just lounging around.
Right, sleeping, basically.
Yeah, and that's not the case either, because your body's going to adapt to what stressor you impose on it. That's how our bodies work. And if you give that no stress, laying around, sleeping, whatever, your body's going to kind of have the opposite effect. And with these guys having to be at such a high peak physical performance, really it's more of an active rest is what they usually get. So maybe in those days they'll probably do something more like go through a stretching or mobility routine, something maybe they'll really work on a lot of muscle or soft tissue work, for example, the foam rollers or trigger point release, things like that. And they might also maybe at that time really focus on rehabilitation exercises if they're playing through a little bit of an injury. Whatever it is that they might be doing at that time, that's probably what they're going to be doing on those rest days. Really take advantage of not loading them so much, but you're loading them just enough that they can still maintain the strength that they're at, the mobility they're at, or even gain strength and mobility if they really need to throughout the season. Because, there's plenty of studies, too, that show, especially in baseball, this is really more of the studied sport, is they show how much less strength within certain portions of the shoulder and how much less what we consider internal rotation of the shoulder they get after not even throwing, but throughout the season they start to lose those things, and then that'll set you up for injury towards the end. And we all know, and a lot of that as well as fatigue is really a big player within injury for sure, especially with as long as a season as they're playing. So the type of rest really is important. It's not just lounging around and doing nothing. Maybe they'll have those on occasion or certain portions of the day of rest, but really it's going to be more of an active rest situation where they're not doing their full activity, the full demand that their sport or training needs to be imposed on them, but they'll kind of scale that back, work on some other things, and then go from there. And that's really where the better of the research is looking, is more towards the active rest component. You really don't want to be completely just shut the body off. That's a rare thing to do during a season. I don't know if I've ever heard of any team really doing that for any instance. I don't know how advantageous that would be. I don't know how much of a benefit that would actually give an athlete. I think it's more of the situation we just discussed. So,
coming up in the NHL schedule for the first time this year, and I mentioned this on Penn's Overtime the other night, but every team will have a bye week, essentially. The Penguins are going to have 7 or 8 days between games in early January, so they have 8 games to go before then, counting tonight's tilt against the Kings at PPG Paints Arena. And then after that, they'll get a break. That has led to a more condensed schedule on both sides of it. It's a little bit more like an Olympic year, it feels like, in terms of number of games per week on average. I think it ticked up a little bit from last season. So some of the players have expressed that they might simply prefer a couple more days between games and not a full bye week. And we'll see what type of rust develops on their games, too, if they're away from the rink for too long.
I never heard that. Do you think it's part of because of the problem with the Olympics as well and the participation in the Olympics, how the NHL, they're trying to mimic every year as an Olympic year now, sort of?
No, I don't believe they're doing that. It might be tied into the World Cup of Hockey, which extended the season for a lot of players, really. I don't know if it's exactly half in the NHL. It's not half, but there was a significant amount, and especially your marquee players had to get training, get serious earlier in the summer.
Right.
And that's what we were talking about. In fact, last time you were on, it was in August when the training camps were opening up for these national teams, or in the case of Team Europe and Team North America, the faux national teams. But that was a new feature this season. And like you mentioned, in a couple of years, it's looking like they're going to be going to the Olympics in Pyeongchang, South Korea. So talk about jet lag and all that, something that you experience a little bit when you come across the country here to Pittsburgh, come back home.
Right?
Yeah, that's halfway across. That's the entire way around the other side of the globe in that case. All right, moving on to biomechanics. And as I mentioned, in addition to being a doctor of physical therapy and a certified athletic trainer, you're also a strength and conditioning specialist. So this is more in that last specialty for you, more in that wheelhouse. But I remember reading something about Sidney Crosby back when he was just a young lad in the NHL. He would send photos back to his personal trainer, Andy O'Brien, who, coincidentally or not, is now the director of the Penguins Sports Science Department, which they established this past summer. So Andy is in charge of everything the Penguins are doing to try to get their athletes at full capacity as often as possible. But Sid would send these still photos and ask Andy if he liked the angles, which were formed by his upper and lower leg, his hips, that sort of thing, in order to maximize his power output. And you and I were discussing just how good Sid is at bodying up defenders. He's almost like a post player in basketball a lot of times, using his frame, which is already kind of squat, not short necessarily, but he's wide. About 5'11", 200 pounds, I think, are his vitals. So he's built low to the ground. He's already ideal in that way to work down low, to be a power forward type with, of course, unbelievable skill that he brings to the table. But you were saying to me that he puts the opponent in such powerless positions. And I'm guessing, I know that you were talking about the position of his body and how he uses leverage in that way.
Yeah, it looks like he's taking people earlier. We talked about that too. I think before he kind of waited to see, what the defender was going to do, and then this year it seems like he's taking the kind of the defender completely out of.
More aggressive.
Yeah, he's being a little more aggressive, definitely getting closer to their body. And what too is if there are certain positions for the body, whether it's in too lengthened of a position. So, for example, if you tried to jump from just standing all the way straight, you wouldn't be able to do that. You have to squat a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But same thing, on the other side, you wouldn't squat all the way down to the ground to try to jump straight up. So, to make that applicable to the hockey world and what he's doing, he's getting within their body, so he's making them in a really shortened position. So it's really difficult for them to try to push them off the puck because it's hard for them to generate force. But yeah, biomechanics is a really interesting, and it's one of my favorite portions of movement, and it has a big carryover within all the disciplines that I treat. And a lot of that stuff even comes out of the physical therapy literature with prevention of injury, and especially when you talk about ACL injuries and knee injuries. A lot of biomechanical studies and stuff have come from that, but not only within the shoulder and every other joint, but the knee is probably one of the more common or more famous to kind of discuss. But yeah, that's certainly one of the things is if you have to look at what position and what angle he is, and there's an optimal position, but obviously if you break it down even further, and somebody like Sidney Crosby or any professional athlete, really, I'm sure they have the means in which to study their own body and say, I have this long of certain bones, especially in the leg, like the femur and the tibia. How can I get those in the best position to create the best force? And, it's obviously it's going to be an estimation. It's not going to be completely perfect, but there is going to be something that's better aligned for more force or less force to be produced. And yeah, that's really a really interesting fact that when you told me about that, when he would send photos, I think that's really cool because he's really breaking it down. You can see how much of a cerebral athlete he is, and
No doubt.
how much he, like we said too, it looks like he's gotten stronger, but really how much is it that he's just become more efficient at what he's doing? How much is he putting defenders in these inefficient positions? How much is it that he's changed his game technically more so than he has done anything more physically as far as gaining more strength, gaining more muscle? Maybe that hasn't changed. Maybe it's just this whole thing. He's just using physics to his advantage in that case. It's just like a really complex physics problem. You just figure out what makes you more efficient, them less efficient. How can you create more force versus them and power output? So, yeah, pretty neat.
He strikes me as a technician, someone who is constantly working to make his movements as efficient as possible. What do you see from good skaters compared to, say, good sprinters? Do you see a similarity in fundamentals between the two disciplines, running and skating? I know they are different. The weight transfer is different. You have a glide factor on ice as well. But I'm guessing that the same thing that puts you in a powerful spot to make a 100-yard sprint, 100-meter dash, is the same thing that allows Carl Hagelin to fly up and down the rink too.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's certainly different trunk positions that can optimize, certain muscle activation and using more of a certain muscle or a certain joint than another. So, for example, the gluteals are a muscle that you really want to kind of tap into a little bit more.
Your butt. Yep. For those who don't know what that means.
There's a reason. Yeah. So those are ones that they produce more force than, say, your quadriceps on the front of your leg around the knee. The knee isn't nearly as powerful of a strong joint as the hip would be. So especially with hockey, those guys have to have not only mobile hips, but very strong and stable hips. And then if you look at a lot of times whenever somebody goes to sprint for a puck, for example, or if you watch how Olympic sprinters come out of a block, there's a certain angle that their trunk is going to make with the ground. And if they're too far forward, they're not going to be quite as able to produce force within certain musculature. But if they're too far upright, same thing. They're not going to be able to produce as much force. So there is an optimal angle there where you'd like to hit, or you'd like to see somebody hit to be able to produce that. So when you talk about, what does one particular athlete do better than another, part of that could be that he could be just hitting better angles, and he hits it more consistently throughout each stride. He's not falling in and out of an efficient position, and that's why he can create more power and force and speed versus somebody else who might have more of kind of a deviation of his body weight as he's trying to produce a stroke through the skating or the running. So there's quite a lot of variables within that. But yeah, there's certainly an optimal type position that you would want to see to create that amount of speed and force. So yeah, there are certain things that maybe Carl Hagelin does better than anybody, and I don't know specifically, but he does look like when he's skating, there's not a whole lot of extra movement side to side or up and down. He kind of really just beelines for what direction he wants to go. So
he seems to have quite a bit of forward lean in his stride, almost where his knee is hitting his chest on some of these strokes, as you call them, just the strides. So as you were saying, with the length of the femur, length of bones, what your build is, everyone's got a different optimal spot, I'm sure. So you can't just say I could say I'm going to mimic Sidney Crosby. Maybe my body isn't built like that. I need to be a little bit different.
True. Yeah, and there's certainly inherent reasons from an anatomical aspect, how he's built, that makes him probably more efficient than if you and I went out there and tried the same exact thing. And we're
a little lankier than he is.
Yeah,
so.
And I think part of that too is that I think I brought this up maybe last time I was here. The Sports Gene, which is a great book for anybody who's interested in.
David Epstein wrote it.
Yeah, great book for anyone who's just interested in athletics in general from all sports. And he talks about that whole idea of what makes a particular athlete really good at their sport versus another. And it's not a coincidence that you'll see certain body types are really good at certain things. So yeah, you can't make somebody who's 5'6" and 230 pounds a great distance runner, and you're not going to make a 7 foot tall with a wingspan of 8 feet good at powerlifting.
Yeah.
So there's certain body types that are made for that. And again, and he said, we do know these optimal angles, but some people's anatomy is just built to use that better than others. And I think Sidney Crosby is one of those for a hockey side of things, that he for sure is utilizing, not only biomechanics, but also his God-given gift of what he looks like and how he's built. So
he doesn't have the greatest reach in the world, but he looks like otherwise that he was designed in a lab to play this sport. Right. So we're all the better for his choice to do so and be as diligent about optimizing as he is. And that's funny you mentioned about the powerlifting. I always remember being envious when I started lifting weights. All the short squat guys were able to put up a lot more on the bench or do more squats or more on the squat in terms of weight. And I'm thinking, well, why can't I do that? Well, a lot of it is just the fact that my arms are a little bit longer than most, so there's a greater distance to travel. So I do have that built-in excuse.
Yeah, hey, that means that we're built for speed, not for the exact strength and pushing a lot of weight, but we can move faster. So
so joke's on them, I suppose.
Somewhere else.
Right, you have to look at the bright side here. We're trying to do so. We always try to do so here on Gike's Got Game. As we move into the second half of the program, some more local music coming your way. And then when we return, I typically ban a sports cliche or just a cliche from day-to-day life, but I want to talk about a different part or a different type of ban. In fact, there was a recent article on ViceSports.com by Patrick Ruby, who's an excellent long-form reporter, about the case for banning high school football. We'll get Mark's input on that. He has been an athletic trainer for high school football, countless games, also college football too. So we'll get his take on the benefits and the potential damages of football on young bodies. This is Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge.
Hey, this is Mike Sasson. If you've been searching for something to do with your pathetic life, guess what? This ain't it. But it'll kill about an hour. It's the Mike Sasson Show, starting 10 a.m. on July 19th, going to 11. It's going to be a lot of fun here on the River's Edge, a new kind of radio.
And we're back, and Mark is still talking during our between period cross chatter. Hey, we take you behind the curtain here at Gike's Got Game.
Insight into what we talk about.
Right, we should just leave the mics on while the music is playing. I don't think the artists would appreciate that.
No.
But they have free reign over this station when it's in the afternoons and evenings, so I suppose we could talk over them a little bit, give you a concert-like feel. And, well, here we go for period number 3 on Gike's Got Game. I'm Matt Gajtka. Mark Gajtka is with me. We have an actual expert in the studio. That's always fun. Sports medicine, athletic training. What else would you say is in your purview? I mentioned strength and conditioning, so you have a passion for all of it.
Everything.
Everything, literally everything.
I love everything.
And you're also a run-of-the-mill passionate sports fan
Yes.
as well. I don't want people to think you're with your professorial glasses on when you watch the Penguins, for instance.
I literally think if I don't put the TV is usually not something I'll put on all the time, but if it is on, the only reason I have it is for sports. I'll watch anything.
Okay.
You know? If volleyball's on, it's on.
Volleyball. You've played volleyball.
I have.
At a competitive level in a tournament,
Yeah.
which is interesting. I stink at volleyball, so I really respect that. Yeah, your future brother-in-law played D1
He sure
volleyball for St. Francis,
Shout out
correct?
to Michael Krepp.
Yeah, Mike Krepp, if you're listening, if you're watching, this is your little Easter egg. If you made it this far into the show, you get a shout out. We should try that more often. We have a more serious topic coming up on the way, maybe the most serious one of the show. But before that, some frivolousness would be nice, too, to leaven the mixture. You were talking about listening to Penguins Lightning the other day when you were out west. You have Sirius XM, so you get the opportunity to hear some different broadcasts besides just the Penguins radio network. And you say it's funny every time they play the Lightning, and of course they played the Lightning in a 7-game series last spring, so perhaps that's why you were exposed to this. That is why you're exposed to this broadcast team more often than not. But not my favorite play-by-play guy in the world, Dave Mishkin, does a lot of screaming, and I think it's distracting to follow. When I was down in Bradenton for spring training last year, listened to some games, I wasn't the biggest fan. He's no Mike Lang, I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
But also, Phil Esposito, Hockey Hall of Famer and original GM of the Tampa Bay Lightning, is the color analyst. And you were saying this might be the worst hockey broadcast, maybe the worst sports broadcast you've listened to at a professional level.
Yeah, and I've got to listen to a decent amount of guests, or I would consider visitor, because I'm always listening to the Pens.
Opposing broadcasts.
Because I'm always listening to the Pens, at least whether it's on that or I have the NHL app that I have on the PlayStation that I'll throw up on the screen if I'm at home. But yeah, it is the most distracting thing ever. And Phil, I swear, it's like your grandpa sitting in a recliner on the side just making comments. It's like, shoot the puck! And just screaming over.
Right, and this is a guy who knows hockey, too, and he's acting like a fan, basically.
And something happens, he reacts real time to it, which I guess, for maybe a local, for the Tampa Bay crowd and for their fans, maybe that's a cool thing to, maybe it's funny, maybe it's quirky. But,
I suppose.
But maybe for TV, because he's not actually giving any insight to what's going on, and half the time you don't know what's happening, and he's just reacting to it, and he's just like, "Oh boy, look at that!" And he's like, "Will you just look at this?"
Yeah,
and you're like, "No, I can't look at it."
Yeah, we can't
radio.
see it. That brings up an interesting point too, because TV broadcasters are more prestigious; they get more publicity, but I would contend the more skilled broadcasters are on radio because you have to paint the picture with words.
Well, yeah.
And if Phil Esposito was on TV, he could say, "Look at that," and you could look at it.
Exactly.
In fact, that's what you often hear quite a bit in terms of analysis. Bob Airy, he'll point out something that's on a replay, and you'll be educated by that, and you'll understand more what he's talking about. But on the radio, and like we do have Mike Lang and Phil Bork, who do a nice job painting that picture on a nightly, bi-nightly basis, if you will, multi-times a week. In the sport of hockey, I've always enjoyed Mike Lang's cadence too, and that's a thing that is important for radio. You have to know when something important is about to happen, and
Right.
you can't be at the consistent high energy level, and you don't want to be at the low energy level either for a sport like hockey. You want to have a good pace to it, but you also want to have that extra gear you can go to when the puck's in front of the net, when there's a scramble, when someone could have a scoring chance. So that is what, more so than the funny goal sayings, more so than Mike's personality, that I think is what makes Mike Lang a Hockey Hall of Fame broadcaster.
Yeah, he's great in that regard. Across the net! That's one of my favorites. Every time he does that, it's just like,
Right,
it
and
gets you excited while you're sitting listening to it. But
the tempo picks up.
But even him and Phil, they work really well together too. Because then, if Mike, very rarely does he miss a situation and not necessarily describe it on the fly really well. But when he does, Phil fills in the gaps and he comes in and he describes the whole play from top to bottom and really like you said, paint that picture for you for radio, and how important is that? And I think that the Tampa Bay guys just. Not to rag on them specifically.
Well,
but
if they're bad, they're bad. So
Yeah.
we're going to call a spade here on Gike's Got Game. But what makes me feel bad is that these people who are pretty good hockey fans in Tampa these days, they've had the
Right.
team for more than 2 decades. They've had some success,
teams.
a Stanley Cup. Right now, you could argue they're right there with the Penguins in terms of top team in the East, maybe even the entire NHL.
Right.
And you want the fans in the non-traditional, quote-unquote, hockey markets to get an idea of what a good broadcast sounds like, and they
Right.
just don't have that.
no, not in any regard.
Right, exactly. And I think Dave Mishkin, I mentioned, he's an acquired taste, does a lot of screaming, and it's a jarring listen is what I'll say. You don't want it to be like that. You want to settle in, and Mike Lang does as good as anybody in that area. And I'm glad you brought up Phil Bourque, too, because the radio analyst in hockey has to get his points in quickly.
Yeah.
He has to get in and get out, because this isn't like baseball where you can just talk and talk and talk. No offense to Bob Walker, John Wayner, or Steve Blass, but they have a lot more time to get their points in. They can be more imprecise with what they're saying. They can talk around it and finally get to it.
Right.
Phil Bourque doesn't have that luxury. And I thought the Connor Sheary goal the other night against Boston in the third period, Mike didn't have a great call on it, which happens sometimes as he gets a little bit older, maybe not seeing things quite as well as he used to. But Phil picked it apart and said, well, Dumoulin created a different angle for this pass. Connor Sheary goes down to one knee to deflect it in. He, as you mentioned, went from top to bottom and gave you, I had an awesome idea. I could picture it in my mind's eye before I even saw it on video, which was very helpful as I did the post-game show. So shout out to Phil for helping me out there and for being a great server of fans. That is ultimately what you're doing, especially when you're on the radio. You have to be the eyes and ears, and the Pens crew does wonderfully at that. On to the Ban the Cliche segment, and I suppose if I had to make it a cliche, the phrase Friday Night Lights has become certainly something that's said quite a bit when you talk about high school football. So the topic that I saw raised on Twitter, and again I want to give a shout out to Patrick Ruby of Vice Sports. He has previously been with other entities, including ESPN.com, but now applying his trade for Vice, one of the newer voices in sports media. He had a story, and I haven't been able to work all the way through it, but something I've been thinking about as I think about the after effects of, in particular, concussions, but just football on young bodies and old bodies, in fact, and how that carries on for the rest of lifetimes after the playing days are done. But, Mark, should high schools even sponsor high school football? Should that be out of the purview of high schools? Because education and schools in general are supposed to be for the benefit of kids. And if kids are ultimately being hurt by this activity, by playing football, is that something that schools should even be involved in? Should they get out of this, whether it be from a legal perspective to get away from liability, or just from the perspective that you want the best for our children?
Yeah, I don't know if you get rid of it in the lower leagues like this. I just don't see how it's going to make the game any safer at the higher levels, because then what you're doing is you're throwing unskilled people who have this idea of what football should be as opposed to what it really is on the field, and then you're making them play in college or on the professional landscape. And that to me just sounds like a huge mistake, because if you're not teaching, what needs to happen is they just need to teach proper tackling techniques. They need to I think at least go to something that's making the game more safe from the bottom levels, whether that's restricting certain types of tackles or making certain types of things illegal within the, just to at least decrease force, within concussions. Obviously, we're always going to go back to that, but just any injuries and how bad that these guys can get hurt because of a lot of that force coming across and, with throwing their bodies at people and things of that nature. So I think they just need to change how that is and make more rules about certain types of tackles, certain types of hits. For example, like in hockey, you can't leave your feet with a check, charging, right? Maybe something very similar where they can't take more than, 10 strides or a full sprint across the field to lay somebody out. The defenseless receiver hit, obviously a great thing. If somebody's not expecting it, you can't necessarily, lighting somebody up, maybe just at least getting rid of stuff like that to where the force of each hit maybe is a little bit less. I don't know. I think it would just be a mistake to get rid of it completely because of you're now throwing inexperienced people into a very violent game. And the less practice that these guys have at trying to do a better job of not hurting each other while still playing the game and making it still football is going to be really tough. I don't think, the answer I don't think is there yet, but I think there's a big job to do, and it needs to be answered on every level from low, peewee, high school, whatever, all the way up to college and professional. And those changes need to start, and they need to be definitive. You can't be halfway on the fence. You have to be black or white in this instance.
I don't want to mischaracterize Patrick's argument here, and the article is up again on sports.vice.com. He's talking more about just taking it out of high schools, making it a club sport. So the high school themselves aren't responsible for these kids getting hurt. They aren't sanctioning football, and I think he's not completely talking about what you might have thought, where football is completely
just banned.
Yeah,
okay.
You can't play if you're under 18. It's
Then
more. It's more to get. No, it's okay, because that's an argument too that I've seen made, that kids under 18. I've made that argument that they don't know better, and we should not allow them to play until they reach a man's age, so to speak, which in this country is 18. But his argument is more based around the fact that schools shouldn't even be in the high school, or shouldn't even be in the football business. They shouldn't sanction this, and they should leave it up to private clubs, like we see a lot with youth soccer.
Right. Or hockey with USHL.
Right, yeah, there's quite a bit of that in hockey too. So what's your feeling on that, if the argument is that let's just get the high school equation out of it, schools should not be sponsoring football?
That's pretty interesting. But then I think what that might start to I think the effect is people are just so intense about football that I think that's actually might have a almost worse effect, that these people who are going into the clubs are then going to be so intense and pushing their kids, to the limit.
Maybe even more out of control because there's no high school oversight. There's no athletic director or principal looking out.
Potentially. And then whoever's in charge of these things, I mean, you see some of these maniacs that are on some of these shows on Esquire has one too, like that Tykes one.
Yes, was it Friday Night Tykes or something like that? These kids are,
can you imagine
5 and 6 years old playing tackle football, which is outrageous.
Like if you imagine one of those guys that are on there being in charge of those clubs, there's no regulation for that guy.
Right, you'd have to have strong regulation.
You would have to. Yeah,
Correct.
You'd have to have almost like a commissioner for the league. You'd have to have a player safety, essentially. I think you could do that really well. And then, like I said, Matt, before, was if you get the right idea of how to tackle and get these guys within limits of safety first, as opposed to winning first or something, if you make that your focal point, maybe this works out really well. But I don't really have that much faith in the football community as a whole that they would put that first. But taking the liability away from high schools, I don't know if that's a cop out or if that's I don't necessarily see the advantage there. But part of it is I don't know what the school would do, for the league versus if it was a club. But I think if the club was set up correctly, like we just said there, with having the commissioner, having somebody like a player safety, if that was done right, I think that would actually work a lot better than having it within high school, because then you don't have somebody who's inexperienced just coaching some random high school team that's a school of 300 kids. you have somebody that maybe knows a little bit more. They're more educated. They've been around football for a lot longer. They know the regulations. They can now apply that to the kids and have them practice the right things, as opposed to just going out and winging it. So I could see pros and cons for either side, but it's got to be done correctly, in my opinion.
One last thing before we step aside for our final break on this week's episode of Gike's Got Game. Matt Gajtka with my brother Mark Gajtka in studio. And, of course, sports medicine is at the front of mind whenever he comes in, whenever he calls in. We've had you give us a buzz from the West Coast, too. I've thought about this, and this is not my original idea, but if you took the face mask off the helmet, would that make guys more cautious, or would that just bring more unnecessary injuries into play?
I don't know. It'd be tough. Probably at first, you'd probably see maybe an increase in injuries. But then as people got smarter when they were getting jacked in the face and in the eyes and stuff enough times, maybe that stops. But I've even called for less shoulder pad.
How about leather helmets?
Or smaller shoulder pads, just enough to cover certain bony portions of the shoulder, as opposed to these big things where kids can feel invincible.
Right.
I think if you make them feel less invincible, you're going to change the game already. Because if you put those things on, I challenge you not to feel like you can run through a wall.
Oh, sure. I've had hockey shoulder pads that were enormous. I felt like Eric Lindros back in the day. But now I think both hockey and football have, in fact, tried to reduce the size.
Yeah.
If you look back of padding, I'm talking about, if you look back at the 90s, both sports, it was all about having the huge caps on the shoulders, and LeVon Kirkland.
I was going to say, if you saw the old Steeler photos of them running in the shoulder pad sway.
Kevin Green, Greg Lloyd, all those big linebackers, they were enormous men to begin with, but then they also had the weaponized shoulder pads, if you will. So that is one area where I think they're making progress. I would love to run an experiment and see if tackling would be more form tackling and less spearing, less throwing your body at the player like you were discussing earlier.
Maybe you can be the commissioner of the new league and try these experiments out.
I don't
human experiments.
I'm not as invested in football as I would need to be to do something like that.
Starting human experiments on high school age kids.
Right, that would be problematic in and of itself. The article again on Vice Sports is Friday Night Lights Out, the case for abolishing high school football, and that'll take the place of our Ban the Cliche segment. Final timeout. We'll be back. In the meantime, here's Christmas-themed local music, a Christmas song from the album Turnpike Hillbilly coming your way on the River's Edge.
It's headquartered in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. There's probably like 0 people up there. I was on a cruise with a guy from Alberta, and he had never been out of Alberta before in his life.
Yeah.
And he was like, he's like, when the oil freezes in your car? And I'm like, no. Hey, Money Bags, tune into Funny Money at 7 a.m. Thursdays.
Did you hear Tom? He said 7 a.m. Tune in.
That'll get you in the Christmas spirit on the 16th of December.
I'm ready.
This is Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge. And again, we're on Facebook Live, and you can access that Facebook Live stream on our website, riversedgepgh.com/live. So there's a couple of avenues there. Also, this show and all of our talk shows will be on the SoundCloud page, and that's accessible through riversedgepgh.com. You can catch it on demand if you don't catch it live, but this show is on live every Friday, almost every Friday at 8 a.m. Had a week off for Thanksgiving, but that's been about it. It's been a nice stream of radio content coming from your boy here since the end of the baseball regular season. You know what, though? I took 1 week off after our child was born, our little guy Lucas, so he's in the world. It's been enjoyable, and hey, I'm typically up at this hour of the day anyway. I'm up earlier than usual for some early morning feedings, as Mark has experienced this week. He's staying where he stayed with us last night. Yeah, you were putting him through his strength and conditioning paces the other day, working on neck strength, and he's making some progress. I think.
He's great. He's getting some nice head lifts and turns, and it's pretty good.
Yeah, speaking of biomechanics, baby biomechanics were something we were worried about.
Hot topic.
Taking videos of and making sure that everything was on the up and up for little Lucas, or Dobie as we call him, one of many nicknames that the little tyke has. On to the final segment. Our final number this week is 298. That's the number of yards that Le'Veon Bell accrued from scrimmage. during the Steelers' win at Buffalo, snowy Buffalo, last Sunday. And Mark, you had the feeling when the snow was coming down, it was going to be a Le'Veon Bell type of day, and it was indeed that. Ben Roethlisberger threw 3 picks. 3 could have been the final number. His odd home-road splits over the past 3 seasons now continue to accumulate, and I don't think he has an idea what exactly is going on there. At the same time, he could lean on Bell. I've called him the perfect modern back in other forms. In fact, on the Final Word just this past weekend on WPXI, that was my tagline for Le'Veon Bell. I don't think he's the Steelers' MVP. I think it's tough to put a non-quarterback in that category unless something's really out of the ordinary. Maybe Ezekiel Elliott in Dallas could qualify as the Cowboys' MVP this year. But typically it is the QB, especially when you have an elite one like Roethlisberger. However, Bell is right there next to him because he can make plays out of the passing game in addition to making plays when he gets the handoff. He had 236 rushing yards last week, and so he tacked on 62 more receiving, and that's kind of a low number for him. Maybe the snow held down the passing game for the Steelers. But here's another number for you. He was the 48th overall pick in 2013. And if you have a redraft, Mark, I guarantee he goes in the top 5 that year.
Yeah, he's got to go. Jeez, I mean, if somebody can see, I think, well, let me just say, I think the Steelers essentially have a good sense of talent within those rounds, too.
Sure.
You know, usually the
second, third, fourth,
round. Yeah, they usually
mid-round.
get some of their big-time dudes, I think, within those rounds, and they find, some great talent there. So, but, man, he's just been a monster. I love watching Le'Veon Bell play too. So, yeah, between his skills within the passing game and then rushing is just the patience that he shows with. I don't think any other running back does what he does with that. Mm-hmm. Whenever he gets the ball, kind of waits for things to develop, and then if it doesn't, he creates. And most of the time, I think he has enough faith in his line that they're going to create something for him, at least enough to get something going, and they do. And he has a lot of trust in that, and I think that takes a pretty good team to be able to have that between both sides, the line and the running back, and it's fun to watch.
The game is faster these days. The pass rushers are in your face a lot quicker than they used to be. So, in addition to the running game, it helps to have a guy who's your safety valve. And with Heath Miller retired, it's been Bell more and more often this season. Not that he wasn't a huge part of the offense beforehand, but I think even more so as Ladarius Green, the Steelers' new tight end, gets acclimated, gets on the field first of all.
Yeah, right.
And he's played a role. He's been more of a target, 2 or 3 games now. And so the Steelers go down to Cincinnati this weekend, and then they're home to the Ravens on Christmas Day, which is a game that could very easily decide the AFC North. The Ravens could, in fact, fall 2 games back if they were to lose this week and the Steelers were to win. I don't remember who the Ravens have, in fact, but they lost to the Patriots just this past Sunday night, so they have fallen a game off the pace, and it's looking once again like a division championship season, most likely, here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, push it again, baby.
Possibly, and at least have a home game in the playoffs. Last year, they did not have that luxury. Had to go to Cincinnati and get bailed out by Vontaze Burfict and Pac-Man Jones, and oh boy, what a mess that was at the end of that game, but it worked out.
Shout out to VU.
Yeah, in the Steelers' favor. Shout out to them. And Burfict was an Oregon Duck, I think, out your way. So that's where he comes from.
Oh, I thought it was Arizona.
I'm fairly certain. Arizona
State?
Oh, I have no idea. I thought he was Oregon. But
was he? Oh, okay.
Maybe I'm wrong. I'll have to look into that. Clearly, my college scouting isn't as good as the Steelers for picking up Le'Veon Bell. So, again, 298 yards for the former Michigan State Sparty. Le'Veon Bell has been quite the get for the Steelers. 48th overall in 2013, continues to be one of the most dynamic offensive players in general in the NFL. Mark, you've been very dynamic today. Thank you for waking up early with me.
Thank you.
As we can see on your shirt, your business is booming out west, and you're about to head east, very much east, all the way to Europe and Africa coming up here.
So far east will be west.
Yeah, that really blows your mind. Well,
past the prime meridian.
In fact, you will be. You'll be in the Eastern world.
Yeah, we'll be
right.
Southern Hemisphere.
Mm-hmm. Going to Tanzania for a safari type adventure. So I expect a full report. I don't expect you to call into the show from there, but that would be
most likely not.
Right. So there's some long distance minutes. Possibly not a lot of cell phone signal out there, I don't think.
Yeah, I have other things to worry about.
Yeah, like
live animals and malaria,
wildebeests, and And he just got his shots, in fact, did Mark the other day. Yellow fever, that's been taken care of. And so we want him to be protected so we can bring him back into studio.
Part of Cyborg now.
Yes, thank you again for stopping by.
Thanks for having me as usual.
Well, you drove me down here, so thanks for driving me to the studio here in Millvale, at the Millvale Studios. Again, for Mark, this is Matt. Thank you for watching and listening. Once again, this has been Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge. And this is Matt reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. And we'll chat with you on the backside of the weekend. Again, Tuesday night, another edition of Pens Overtime. Penguins and Rangers will be with you after the final horn there. Talk to you soon.